One broken heel on Fifth Avenue sparks the beginning of a love story Maggie never saw coming. But when past secrets surface, can she trust her heart again? Or will old wounds keep her from a second chance? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. The spring sun shone brightly over Fifth Avenue as Margaret Maggie Lane hurried down the crowded sidewalk. At 58, she still had the energy of someone much younger, though the lines around her eyes told stories of both joy and heartache. Her navy sheath dress, a reminder of her days working in publishing, hugged her still trim figure as she weaved through the sea of pedestrians. Maggie wasn't actually running late for anything important. Since her divorce 5 years ago, she'd developed the habit of moving quickly through her days. Keep moving, keep busy. That was her motto. It helped her avoid dwelling on regrets and the emptiness of her apartment. "Excuse me," she murmured, sliding past a group of tourists who were pointing up at the skyscrapers. Just as she picked up her pace again, it happened. The heel of her right shoe caught in a crack in the sidewalk. There was a sharp snap, and suddenly, Maggie was falling forward, arms flailing. She braced herself for the impact with the hard concrete, but instead felt strong arms catching her. "Whoa, careful there," a deep voice said. Maggie looked up to find herself in the arms of a tall, distinguished-looking man with silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. His blue eyes crinkled with concern. I'm so sorry," Maggie stammered, trying to regain her footing before realizing her broken heel made it impossible. She wobbled again. "Don't apologize," the man said, steadying her. "That sidewalk came out of nowhere." Despite her embarrassment, Maggie couldn't help but smile. The stranger was handsome in a weathered sort of way, dressed in jeans and a crisp white shirt that seemed at odds with his expensive-looking coat. There was something in his eyes that spoke of someone who had seen his share of life's complications. "I'm Daniel," he said, still holding her arm to keep her balanced. "Daniel Westbrook." "Maggie Lane," she replied, attempting to take a step and nearly toppling over again. Without hesitation, Daniel scooped her up into his arms. "What are you doing?" Maggie gasped, feeling her cheeks flush as pedestrians turned to stare. "Getting you off this dangerous sidewalk," Daniel answered with a grin, carrying her effortlessly through the crowd and across the busy street, weaving between honking taxis. When they reached the safety of the opposite curb, he gently set her down, making sure she was steady before letting go completely. "Thank you," Maggie said, feeling flustered in a way she hadn't experienced in years. But that was completely unnecessary. Daniel smiled, and Maggie noticed the small dimple in his right cheek. "I think you owe me a coffee," he said. "Or at least your name, which I already have." "I should get going," Maggie said, glancing at her broken shoe. "I need to find somewhere to buy new shoes." "There's a department store just down the block," Daniel offered. "And right next to it is a coffee shop with excellent lattes. What do you say?" Maggie hesitated. She hadn't been on a date in years, not since the divorce from Robert had left. Her heart bruised and her confidence shaken. But this wasn't a date, she reminded herself. It was just coffee with a kind stranger who had saved her from a nasty fall. "All right," she agreed finally. "One coffee." Daniel's smile widened. "Perfect." 20 minutes later, Maggie sat across from Daniel in a cozy corner of the coffee shop, a new pair of sensible shoes on her feet and a steaming latte in front of her. "So, Margaret Lane," Daniel said, taking a sip of his black coffee. "What brings you rushing down Fifth Avenue on a Thursday afternoon?" "Just Maggie, please," she corrected. "And I wasn't rushing. I always walk like that." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Always in a hurry to get somewhere?" "Or away from somewhere," Maggie admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "Old habits die hard, I guess. I've been on my own for 5 years now, still getting used to it." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Divorced?" "Yes." "After 30 years of marriage?" Maggie stirred her coffee, watching the swirl of cream. "Robert, my ex-husband, decided he wanted a fresh start with his 28-year-old assistant." "I'm sorry," Daniel said quietly. Maggie waved a hand dismissively. "Ancient history, what about you? Are you married?" A shadow passed over Daniel's face. "Widowed 5 years ago?" "I'm sorry," Maggie echoed his words, feeling genuine sympathy. "Cancer," Daniel explained simply. Julie fought hard, but in the end, he trailed off, his fingers tightening around his coffee cup. A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but weighted with shared understanding of loss and change. "So what do you do, Daniel Westbrook?" Maggie asked, eager to shift to lighter ground. "I used to be in tech investment," he replied. "Made a lot of money, lost touch with what mattered. These days I mostly keep to myself, do some consulting work. When something interests me." Maggie tilted her head. "That's quite a change. Life has a way of reshuffling your priorities," Daniel said with a shrug. "What about you?" "I was an editor at Patterson Publishing for 25 years, Maggie said. "Took early retirement after the divorce. Now I volunteer at the library, twice a week, and try to figure out what comes next." "And what does come next?" Daniel asked, his blue eyes studying her with interest. Before Maggie could answer, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's my daughter. I should take this." Daniel nodded and Maggie answered the call. "Rachel, is everything okay?" The voice on the other end was strained. "Mom, I need to talk to you. Can I come over tonight?" "Of course, honey, what's wrong?" "I'll tell you when I see you. Around 7, I'll be there," Maggie promised before hanging up. She looked at Daniel apologetically. "I'm sorry, but I should get going. My daughter sounds upset." "No apologies necessary," Daniel said, standing when she did. "Family comes first." They walked to the door together, and outside Daniel handed her a business card. "In case you ever want to have coffee again," he said. "No pressure." Maggie took the card, feeling a flutter of something she hadn't felt in years. "Thank you for the coffee and the rescue." "My pleasure, Maggie Lane," Daniel said with that dimpled smile. As they parted ways, Maggie slipped his card into her purse, telling herself she probably wouldn't call. Her life was complicated enough without adding a man to the mix, especially one who made her feel so seen. At 7 that evening, Maggie's doorbell rang. She opened it to find her daughter, Rachel, standing there with mascara streaked down her cheeks and 2 large suitcases behind her. "Oh, Mom," Rachel sobbed, falling into Maggie's arms. "Mark and I are getting divorced." Maggie held her 35-year-old daughter tightly. "Come in, sweetheart. Tell me everything." Over cups of tea at Maggie's kitchen table, Rachel poured out the story. Mark had been having an affair with a co-worker for months. When Rachel confronted him, he'd admitted he wanted out of the marriage. 3 years, Rachel said bitterly. 3 years of my life wasted on him. "I'm so sorry," Maggie said, reaching across to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Can I stay here for a while?" Rachel asked, wiping away tears. "Just until I figure things out." "Of course you can," Maggie assured her. "Stay as long as you need." Later that night, after getting Rachel settled in the spare bedroom, Maggie sat, alone in her living room. She glanced at her purse, thinking of Daniel's business card tucked inside. With a sigh, she pushed the thought away. Her daughter needed her now. Romance, or whatever that flutter in her chest had been, would have to wait. The next morning, Maggie woke to find Rachel already up, sitting at the kitchen table staring into a mug of coffee. "Did you sleep at all?" Maggie asked gently. Rachel shook her head. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. How could he do this to me, Mom?" Maggie sat down beside her daughter. "I wish I had answers for you. When your father left, I asked myself the same question every day for months." "How did you get through it?" Rachel asked, looking up with red-rimmed eyes. "One day at a time," Maggie replied honestly. "Some days were harder than others, but eventually it stopped hurting quite so much." Rachel's face hardened suddenly. "Is that why you never tried again, because it hurt too much?" The accusation in her daughter's voice took Maggie by surprise. "What do you mean? You just gave up, Mom, on Dad, on love, on everything. You retired early, you barely date. It's like you decided life was over at 53. "That's not fair," Maggie protested, stung by the words. "Isn't it?" Rachel challenged. "You always taught me to be strong and independent. But there's a difference between being independent and being alone." Before Maggie could respond, Rachel pushed back from the table. "I need to shower. I have to call work and let them know everything." Left alone, Maggie sat with her daughters, words echoing in her mind. Had she given up? She'd been so focused on surviving after Robert left, on rebuilding her sense of self, that maybe she had closed herself off to new possibilities. Reaching for her purse, Maggie pulled out Daniel's business card. Daniel Westbrook, it read simply, with a phone number. No title, no company name. Just like the man himself. Straightforward, but with depths she sensed ran far below the surface. After a moment's hesitation, Maggie picked up her phone and typed out a text message. Daniel, it's Maggie Lane from yesterday. The woman with the broken heel. I was wondering if you might like to have coffee again sometime. Her finger hovered over the send button. Was she ready for this? With Rachel staying with her, was this the right time to be thinking about dating? From down the hall came the sound of her daughter's muffled crying. Maggie's heart ached. She knew that pain all too well. Maybe Rachel was right. Maybe they had both been hiding from life rather than living it. Taking a deep breath, Maggie pressed send. Almost immediately, 3 dots appeared on her screen, showing Daniel was typing a response. Maggie felt her heart rate quicken as she waited for his reply. I'd like that very much, his message read. How about tomorrow at 2 house? Same place? Smiling to herself, Maggie typed back a quick yes. As she set her phone down, she heard Rachel emerging from the bathroom. Whatever came next, with Daniel, with her daughter, with this new chapter of her life, Maggie decided she would face it head-on. No more rushing through life, too afraid to pause and see what might be waiting if she only slowed down enough to notice. For the first time in years, Maggie felt a spark of something like hope glowing in her chest. It was terrifying. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to be terrified again. The next day, Maggie found herself standing in front of her closet, something she hadn't done with such care in years. She pulled out 3 different outfits before settling on a simple red blouse and black pants. Going somewhere? Rachel asked from the doorway, her eyes puffy from another night of crying. Maggie hesitated. Just meeting a friend for coffee. Rachel's expression shifted from sadness to curiosity. A friend or a date? Just coffee, Maggie said, brushing past her daughter to check her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She dabbed on a touch of lipstick, another thing she hadn't bothered with. In months. It is a date, Rachel said, following her. Despite her own heartbreak, a small smile played at her lips. Who is he? His name is Daniel, Maggie admitted. I met him yesterday when my heel broke on 5th Avenue. He caught me before I fell. How romantic, Rachel teased, sitting on the edge of the bathtub, like something out of a movie. Maggie rolled her eyes. Hardly. He's just a nice man who offered me coffee. And you said yes. That's a big step for you, Mom. There was something in Rachel's voice, not quite approval, but not the accusation from yesterday either. Maggie turned to face her daughter. I wasn't planning to start dating with you going through all this, she said gently. I can cancel if you need me here. Rachel shook her head. No, don't do that. I'm a mess, but I'll be fine for a couple of hours. She paused, then added, maybe you were right to take it slow after Dad left. Jumping right back into dating didn't exactly work out well for me. Maggie sat beside her daughter on the edge of the tub. Every heartbreak is different, honey. You can't compare your situation to mine. I just feel so stupid, Rachel confessed. I thought Mark and I were happy. You're not stupid, Maggie said firmly. You trusted someone you loved. There's no shame in that. They sat in silence for a moment before Rachel stood up. Go on your date, Mum. I'm going to call some friends, maybe go out for lunch myself. Can't hide in here forever. Relieved to see her daughter making an effort, Maggie hugged her tightly. I won't be late. Movie night tonight? With ice cream, Rachel agreed with a small smile. At precisely 2 Tau, Maggie walked into the coffee shop, feeling a flutter of nerves in her stomach. Daniel was already there, seated at the same table as yesterday. When he saw her, he stood, his face brightening with a smile. You came, he said, pulling out her chair. Did you think I wouldn't? Maggie asked, settling into her seat. I wasn't sure, Daniel admitted. You seemed hesitant yesterday. My daughter showed up at my door last night, Maggie explained. Her husband's been cheating on her. They're getting divorced and she's staying with me for a while. Daniel's expression turned sympathetic. That's rough. How's she holding up? As well as can be expected, Maggie said with a sigh. That brings back a lot of memories for both of us. I can imagine, Daniel said quietly. When my wife died, my son Ben and I, well, we didn't handle it well. Grief affects everyone differently. You have a son? Maggie asked, realizing how little she knew about this man. Daniel nodded. Ben's 38, works in finance in Boston. His voice held a note of sadness. We don't talk much these days. I'm sorry to hear that, Maggie said. My fault mostly, Daniel admitted. After Julie died, I shut down. Couldn't handle the pain, so I pushed everyone away, including Ben. That's understandable, Maggie said softly. Grief can be overwhelming. Daniel looked at her with those deep blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. What about you? How did you handle your divorce? Maggie took a sip of her latte, buying time to gather her thoughts. Not well at first. I was angry, hurt, humiliated. I threw myself into work until I couldn't anymore. Then I just stopped. Took early retirement, pulled back from friends, focused on getting through each day. And now? Daniel asked. Now I'm having coffee with a handsome stranger, Maggie said with a small smile, taking things one day at a time. Daniel's smile matched hers. I liked the sound of that. Their conversation flowed easily after that, moving from the personal to more general topics. Maggie learned that Daniel had grown up in Chicago, had studied engineering before getting into tech investment, and had a passion for woodworking that he'd rediscovered in recent years. I have a workshop in my apartment, he explained. There's something calming about creating something with your hands, helps me think. What do you make? Maggie asked, genuinely interested. Small stuff mostly, boxes, picture frames. I'm working on a table now. Daniel looked almost shy. Nothing fancy. I'd like to see them sometime, Maggie said, then blushed at her own forwardness. Daniel's eyes lit up. I'd like that too. When they finally left the coffee shop 3 hours later, Daniel walked Maggie to the subway station. Can I see you again? He asked, his voice holding a note of uncertainty that Maggie found endearing in such a successful, confident man. I'd like that, she replied. But I should warn you, my life is a bit complicated right now with Rachel staying with me. Mine too, Daniel said. I have some business issues I'm sorting out, but I'd still like to try if you would. Maggie nodded. Call me tomorrow? I will, Daniel promised. He leaned in and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek. Thank you for today, Maggie Lane. The feel of his lips lingered on her skin all the way home. Maggie returned to her apartment to find Rachel on the couch, surrounded by photo albums. What's all this? Maggie asked, setting down her purse. Found these in the hall closet, Rachel explained, her voice thick with emotion. Look at this one, my wedding day. Everyone looks so happy. Maggie sat down beside her daughter, looking at the photo of Rachel in her wedding gown, Mark beaming beside her. You were beautiful that day. Was any of it real? Rachel asked, her eyes filling with fresh tears. Did he ever really love me? Oh, honey, Maggie said, putting an arm around her daughter. I'm sure he did. People change, relationships change. It doesn't mean what you had wasn't real. Rachel flipped to another album, older photos from when she was a child. You and Dad look happy here too. Maggie looked at the picture of herself and Robert at Rachel's 10th birthday party. They were laughing, his arm around her waist. We were happy then. What happened to us, Mum? Rachel asked softly. Dad left you for his assistant. Mark cheated on me. Is there something wrong with the women in our family? Absolutely not, Maggie said firmly. The choices your father and Mark made were about them, not about us. We can't blame ourselves for other people's mistakes. Rachel closed the album with a sigh. How was your date? It was nice, Maggie admitted. Daniel is easy to talk to. Tell me about him, Rachel said, looking genuinely interested for the first time in days. As Maggie described Daniel, his silver-flecked hair, his woodworking hobby, the sadness in his eyes when he talked about his late wife, she felt a warmth spreading through her chest. There was something about him that felt different from the few dates she'd gone on since her divorce. You like him, Rachel observed. I can see it in your face, Maggie blushed. It's too soon to say. We barely know each other. Sometimes that's all it takes, Rachel said. One moment and everything changes. When did you get so wise? Maggie asked with a small smile. I learned from the best, Rachel replied, leaning her head on her mother's shoulder. The moment was interrupted by Maggie's phone ringing. She glanced at the screen, expecting Daniel, but instead saw a name that made her stomach clench. Robert. "It's your father," she told Rachel, hesitating before answering. "Hello? Maggie, it's me," Robert's voice came through the speaker. Even after 5 years, the sound of it sent a pang through her heart, not of longing anymore, but of old hurt. "What do you want, Robert?" Maggie asked, keeping her voice neutral. "I heard about Rachel and Mark," he said. "Is she with you?" "Yes, she's here," Maggie replied, glancing at her daughter, who was now sitting up straight, her expression tense. "Put her on," Robert demanded. Maggie covered the phone. "Your father wants to talk to you. You don't have to if you don't want to." Rachel hesitated, then shook her head. "Tell him I'll call him tomorrow. I can't deal with him right now." Maggie nodded and uncovered the phone. "She says she'll call you tomorrow." "Maggie, don't turn her against me," Robert said, his voice hard. "This isn't like when we split up. Rachel needs both her parents right now." "I'm not turning anyone against you," Maggie said, anger flaring. "Rachel is an adult who can make her own decisions. She said she'll call you tomorrow." "Fine," Robert snapped, "but tell her I'm coming to New York next week. I want to see her." After she hung up, Maggie turned to Rachel. "Your father says he's coming to New York next week." Rachel groaned. "Great, that's all I need. Dad and his child bride trying to cheer me up." "Tiffany's not that young," Maggie said automatically, then laughed at herself. "Listen to me, defending her? She's 28 now, Mom. 33 years younger than Dad, that's pretty young." "Well, you don't have to see them if you don't want to," Maggie assured her. "No, I will," Rachel said with a sigh. "He's still my father, even if he's an idiot." The next day, Daniel called as promised. He invited Maggie to dinner that weekend. And despite her nervousness, she accepted. "Nothing fancy," he assured her. "Just a little Italian place I know. Great food, quiet atmosphere." Saturday evening arrived, and Maggie found herself fussing over her appearance again. She chose a simple black dress and pearl earrings, elegant but not overdone. "You look beautiful, Mom," Rachel said from the doorway. "Are you sure you'll be okay alone?" Maggie asked for the third time. Rachel rolled her eyes. "I'm 35, not 15. Besides, Jen is coming over with wine, and we're going to trash. Talk men all night." "Sounds therapeutic," Maggie said with a smile. "Don't wait up." The restaurant Daniel had chosen was indeed small and intimate, with soft lighting and quiet music. He was waiting for her at a corner table standing when he saw her approach. "You look stunning," he said, his eyes warm with admiration. Maggie felt herself blush. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." Over dinner, they shared more of their stories. Daniel told her about building his tech investment company from scratch, the exhilaration of success and the emptiness that came with it. "Julie used to tell me I was working too hard," he said, twirling pasta on his fork. "She was right, of course. I was so focused on building something that would last that I missed a lot of moments that mattered." "Do you regret it?" Maggie asked. Daniel considered the question. "Parts of it. I regret not being more present with Julie and Ben, but the work itself? No. It was challenging, exciting. I just wish I'd found a better balance." "Balance is hard," Maggie agreed. "When Robert left, I threw myself into work because it was the one thing I could control. But eventually, I realized I was using it to hide from life." "And now?" Daniel asked. "Are you still hiding?" The question caught Maggie off guard with its directness. "Maybe," she admitted after a moment. "But I'm trying not to." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing just fine." The touch of his hand sent warmth up Maggie's arm. It had been so long since she'd felt this kind of connection with someone. It was both thrilling and terrifying. After dinner, they walked along the quiet streets, their hands occasionally brushing against each other. When they reached a small park, Daniel gently took her hand in his. "Is this okay?" he asked. Maggie nodded, unable to find words for the emotions swirling inside her. They walked in comfortable silence until they found a bench overlooking a small pond. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," Daniel said as they sat down. Maggie thought for a moment. "I was relieved when Robert left," she admitted quietly. "Not at first. At first I was devastated. But after a while I realized we'd been unhappy for years. We'd just been going through the motions, too afraid to admit it wasn't working anymore. Daniel squeezed her hand. That's a brave thing to admit. Your turn, Maggie said. Daniel took a deep breath. After Julie died, I considered ending my life, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The pain was unbearable. The only thing that stopped me was knowing what it would do to Ben. Maggie turned to face him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes. Without thinking, she reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I'm glad you stayed, she said. Softly, their eyes locked, and slowly Daniel leaned in. His lips met hers in a gentle kiss that made Maggie's heart race. It was tender, questioning, full of possibilities. When they pulled apart, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. I haven't felt this way in a very long time, he confessed. Me neither, Maggie whispered. Later that night, as Daniel walked her to her door, they made plans to see each other again the following weekend. I have to go to Boston for a few days, he explained. Some business with my company's board, but I'll call you every day. I'd like that, Maggie said. He kissed her again, longer this time, before saying goodnight. Maggie entered her apartment in a daze of happiness, only to find Rachel waiting up for her on the couch. So? Rachel asked with a raised eyebrow. How was it? Wonderful, Maggie admitted, unable to keep the smile from her face. He's wonderful. Good, Rachel said. You deserve to be happy, Mom. The sincerity in her daughter's voice brought tears to Maggie's eyes. So do you, sweetheart, and you will be again, I promise. What neither of them knew was that across town, Daniel was facing a challenge that would test their newfound connection. As he entered his penthouse apartment, his phone rang with a call he'd been dreading. Hello, Ben, he answered, his voice tight. I was going to call you tomorrow. Save it, his son's voice came through, cold and distant. I just got off the phone with James Martin. He says you're selling the company. Is that true? Daniel closed, his eyes pinching the bridge of his nose. It's complicated. That's not an answer, Ben snapped. Are you selling the company Mom helped you build? The company you promised would be my inheritance someday? We need to talk about this in person, Daniel said firmly. I'm coming to Boston on Monday. Don't bother, Ben replied. I'll be in New York tomorrow. This isn't a conversation I'm willing to have over the phone. After Ben hung up, Daniel sat heavily on his couch, wondering how he was going to explain everything, not just to his son, but to Maggie too. He'd started to care for her deeply, faster than he'd expected. But there were things about his life, about his past, that he hadn't told her yet. Things that might change how she felt about him completely. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. Maggie hummed to herself as she made coffee, her mind still replaying the kiss she'd shared with Daniel the night before. It had been so long since she'd felt that spark, that connection with someone. The sound of her phone ringing pulled her from her thoughts. Seeing Daniel's name on the screen made her smile. Good morning, she answered. Morning, Daniel replied, his voice strained. I hope I didn't wake you. Not at all. Is everything okay? You sound worried. Daniel sighed heavily. My son Ben is coming to New York today. He's upset about some business decisions I've been making. I'm afraid it's going to be a difficult conversation. I'm sorry to hear that, Maggie said, disappointed, that their Sunday plans might be disrupted, but understanding family came first. Do you need to cancel our walk in the park? Actually, Daniel said, his voice lightening slightly, I was hoping you might join us for dinner. I know it's a lot to ask, but having you there might help keep things civil. Ben can't yell at me, in front of someone he just met. Maggie hesitated. Meeting Daniel's son was a big step, especially when they were at odds with each other. Are you sure that's a good idea? Family conflicts can be messy. I understand if you'd rather not, Daniel said quickly. I just thought, well, I'd like Ben to meet you. You're becoming important to me, Maggie. The warmth in his voice when he said her name made her decision for her. All right. What time and where? 7 o'clock at Marino's. Thank you, Maggie. This means a lot to me. After hanging up, Maggie found Rachel in the kitchen pouring herself a cup of coffee. Morning, Mom, Rachel said, eyeing her curiously. You look happy. Phone call from Daniel? Maggie nodded. He wants me to meet his son tonight. Rachel raised her eyebrows. Wow, that's moving fast. Are you ready for that? I'm not sure, Maggie admitted. Apparently they're having some kind of dispute about Daniel's company. I think he wants me there as a buffer. Careful, Rachel warned. You don't want to get caught in the middle of someone else's family drama. Says the woman living on my couch because of her own family drama, Maggie teased. Rachel smiled reluctantly. Fair point. Just be careful, okay? You barely know this guy. I know, Maggie said more soberly. But there's something about him. Rachel, when I'm with him I feel alive again. Rachel's expression softened. Then go, meet his son. Just keep your eyes open. Later that afternoon, as Maggie was getting ready for dinner, her doorbell rang. Rachel answered it, then called out, Mum, Dad's here. Maggie froze, then quickly finished buttoning her blouse before stepping into the living room. Robert stood, awkwardly by the door, looking much the same as he had 5 years ago, tall, distinguished, his dark hair now streaked with more grey. Robert, Maggie said coolly, I thought you weren't coming until next week. I caught an earlier flight, he replied, his eyes taking in her outfit. You look nice. Going somewhere? Yes, actually, Maggie said, feeling an odd sense of satisfaction at his surprised expression. I have dinner plans. Robert raised an eyebrow. A date? Mom's seeing someone, Rachel interjected, her tone slightly defensive. His name is Daniel. Is that so? Robert said, looking back at Maggie with what almost seemed like jealousy. Anyone I know? I doubt it, Maggie replied. Daniel Westbrook. He used to be in tech investment. Robert's face changed so quickly that Maggie thought she might have imagined it, a flash of recognition quickly masked. Well, I hope he treats you better than I did, he said, his voice strangely tight. Maggie frowned, confused by his reaction. What are you doing here, Robert? Rachel said she'd call you. I was worried about my daughter, Robert said, turning to Rachel. How are you holding up, sweetheart? Rachel shrugged. I've been better. Where's Tiffany? At the hotel, Robert replied. I thought we should talk, just the three of us. I'm sorry, but I really do have to go, Maggie said, grabbing her purse. Rachel, will you be okay? Rachel nodded. Go, we'll be fine. As Maggie headed for the door, Robert caught her arm. Maggie, wait. There's something you should know about Westbrook. Whatever it is, it can wait, Maggie interrupted, pulling her arm free. I'm going to be late. She left the apartment with Robert's troubled expression lingering in her mind. What had he been about to say about Daniel? When Maggie arrived at Marino's, Daniel was waiting outside, pacing nervously. His face lit up when he saw her. You came, he said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. Of course, Maggie replied. Is Ben here yet? He just texted. He's parking the car, Daniel said, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. I should warn you, he can be difficult when he's upset. It'll be fine, Maggie assured him, though she wasn't feeling as confident as she sounded. They entered the restaurant and were shown to a corner table. A few minutes later, a younger version of Daniel strode in, tall, with the same blue eyes, but a harder set to his jaw. He spotted them immediately and approached the table. Dad, he said curtly, before turning to Maggie with a look of surprise. I didn't realize we'd have company. Ben, this is Maggie Lane, Daniel said, standing to make the introduction. Maggie, my son Ben. It's nice to meet you, Ben, Maggie said, extending her hand. Ben shook it briefly before taking a seat. Likewise. Though I have to admit I'm surprised. My father rarely introduces me to the women in his life. There was an edge to his words that made Maggie uncomfortable. Daniel shot his son a warning look. Maggie and I have been seeing each other for just a short time, he said evenly. Well, you've certainly picked an interesting moment to start dating again, Ben said, his eyes fixed on his father. Just as you're about to dismantle everything you and Mom built, Daniel sighed. Ben, I'm not dismantling anything. I'm restructuring the company to ensure its future. By selling it off piece by piece? Ben demanded, his voice rising. That company was supposed to be my inheritance, Dad. Mom wanted me to take over someday. And you will, Daniel insisted. But the tech sector has changed. We need to adapt or we'll become obsolete. As the two men argued, Maggie began to feel increasingly out of place. She knew nothing about Daniel's company or the intricacies of tech investment. But more than that, she was troubled by the anger and hurt in Ben's eyes, and by something Robert had tried to tell her about Daniel. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I'm going to visit the ladies' room." In the relative privacy of the restroom, Maggie checked her phone. There was a text from Rachel. "Dad says to call him ASAP, says it's important." Frowning, Maggie dialed Robert's number. "Maggie," he answered immediately. "Where are you?" "At dinner with Daniel and his son," she replied. "What's so urgent, Robert?" "Listen to me carefully," Robert said, his voice deadly serious. "Daniel Westbrook isn't who you think he is. 5 years ago, his company engineered a hostile takeover. Clive Patterson Publishing, your company. He's the reason you were forced into early retirement." Maggie felt as though the air had been knocked from her lungs. "What? That's not possible. The company was bought by Vertex Investments." "Vertex is a shell corporation owned by Westbrook Technologies," Robert explained. "I only know because my firm handled some of the legal aspects. Maggie, he destroyed your career." But he never mentioned. Maggie trailed off, her mind racing. Daniel had said he used to be in tech investment, but he'd never mentioned Westbrook Technologies or Vertex. Had he known who she was all along? "I need to go," she told Robert, abruptly ending the call. When she returned to the table, Daniel and Ben had reached a strained truce. Daniel looked up at her with a smile that faltered when he saw her expression. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "I'm not sure," Maggie said, sitting down stiffly. "Daniel, what's the name of your company?" Ben answered before Daniel could. "Westbrook Technologies, though soon it'll be Westbrook Chen Technologies, unless Dad goes through with this ridiculous Saley." Daniel shot his son another warning look before turning back to Maggie. "It's complicated." "Did you know?" Maggie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you know who I was when you caught me on Fifth Avenue?" Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes, followed quickly by guilt. "Maggie, I can explain." "Did you know?" she repeated, louder this time. "Yes," Daniel admitted, reaching for her hand. She pulled away. "But it's not what you think." "What I think," Maggie said, struggling to keep her voice steady, "is that you knew exactly who I was. The editor forced into early retirement when Vertex Investments bought Patterson Publishing. Your company." Ben looked between them, confusion on his face. "Dad, what's she talking about?" "I need to go," Maggie said, standing up and grabbing her purse. "Maggie, please," Daniel said, standing too. "Let me explain. I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," Maggie replied, tears stinging her eyes. 5 years ago, and now again. Goodbye, Daniel." She hurried out of the restaurant into the cool night air. Behind her, she could hear Daniel calling her name, but she kept walking, her heart breaking all over again. When she got home, she found Rachel and Robert sitting in the living room, drinking wine and looking through old photo albums. "Mom!" Rachel exclaimed, jumping up when she saw Maggie's tear-streaked face. "What happened?" "You were right," Maggie said to Robert, sinking onto the couch. "Daniel knew exactly who I was. His company is the reason I lost my job." "Oh, Mom," Rachel said, sitting beside her and putting an arm around her shoulders. "I'm so sorry." "I should have warned you sooner," Robert said, looking genuinely regretful. "I only made the connection when you mentioned his name today." Maggie shook her head. "It's not your fault. I was a fool to think someone like that could actually be interested in me." "That's not true," Rachel insisted. "You're amazing, Mom. Any man would be lucky to have you." "Your daughter's right," Robert said, sitting on Maggie's other side. "I was the fool for letting you go." Maggie looked at her ex-husband in surprise. "Robert, I mean it, Maggie," he said quietly. "Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. Tiffany and things aren't working out. I've been thinking a lot about what I threw away." Rachel stood up abruptly. "I'm going to make some tea," she announced, leaving Maggie alone with Robert. "This isn't the time for this conversation," Maggie said tiredly. "When is the time then?" Robert asked. "We've been apart for 5 years. I've had a lot of time to think about what went wrong between us." "You left me for your 23-year-old assistant," Maggie reminded him. "That's what went wrong." I was an idiot, Robert admitted. I threw away 30 years for… What? A midlife crisis? Tiffany is filing for divorce, Maggie, and all I can think about is you. Maggie stood up, needing to put distance between them. I'm sorry your marriage didn't work out, Robert, but that doesn't change anything between us. Doesn't it? He pressed, standing too. We have history, Maggie, a family. We could try again. The doorbell rang, interrupting whatever Maggie might have said. Rachel emerged from the kitchen. I'll get it. A moment later, Daniel's voice came from the entryway. Please, I need to speak with Maggie. She doesn't want to see you, Rachel said firmly. It's okay, Maggie called, moving to the door. I'll hear what he has to say. Daniel stood in the doorway, looking worn and desperate. Maggie, please let me explain. You've got a lot of nerve showing up here, Robert said, coming to stand beside Maggie. Daniel's eyes flicked to Robert, then back to Maggie. Who's this? My ex-husband, Maggie said. Robert. Recognition flashed in Daniel's eyes. Robert Lane, from Henderson and Blackwell Law. That's right, Robert confirmed, looking surprised. Do we know each other? Your firm represented Chen Global in their negotiations with my company, Daniel said, his expression hardening. Did you tell her about me? I told her the truth, Robert replied defiantly. Something you apparently couldn't be bothered to do. The truth? Daniel gave a bitter laugh. Like how your firm advised Chen to tear apart Patterson Publishing and sell it for parts. I bought the company to save it. Maggie looked between the two men, confusion replacing some of her anger. What are you talking about? Patterson was going under, Daniel explained, his eyes never leaving Robert's. Chen Global wanted to buy it and liquidate the assets. I created Vertex as a competing buyer to preserve the company and as many jobs as possible. Is that true? Maggie asked Robert, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. Business is business, he said defensively. The important thing is that he lied to you, Maggie. I didn't lie, Daniel insisted. I just didn't tell the whole truth. I recognized your name when we met, yes. I knew you had worked for Patterson, but our meeting was completely by chance, I swear it. Then why didn't you tell me, Maggie? Demanded, because I was afraid of losing you before I really had a chance to know you, Daniel admitted, his voice softening. I planned to tell you everything, but I wanted you to know me first. The real me, not the corporate raider you might have heard about. Rachel, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes, stepped forward. Maybe we should all sit down and talk calmly, she suggested. Mom, you should hear him out. Maggie looked at her daughter, surprised by her support for Daniel. Fine, she agreed reluctantly. Robert, I think you should go. Maggie, Robert began to protest. Please, Maggie said firmly. This doesn't concern you anymore. After Robert left, Maggie led Daniel to the living room. Rachel made a discreet exit to her bedroom, leaving them alone. Start from the beginning, Maggie said, sitting across from Daniel. I want the whole truth. Daniel took a deep breath. 5 years ago, Patterson Publishing was in serious financial trouble. The CEO had made some bad investments, and the company was ripe for takeover. Chen Global, a conglomerate known for buying struggling companies and selling off their assets, made an offer. I remember the rumors, Maggie said, but we were told Vertex made a better offer. Vertex is a subsidiary I created specifically to counter Chen's offer, Daniel explained. I'd always admired Patterson's publications, especially the educational division you headed. I didn't want to see it dismantled. But you still cut staff, Maggie pointed out. You forced people like me into early retirement. Daniel nodded regretfully. Some restructuring was necessary to save the company. The retirement packages were generous. It wasn't about the money, Maggie interrupted. It was about losing a career I loved, a purpose. I understand that now, Daniel said quietly. Meeting you, getting to know you, it's made me see the human cost of business decisions I made. Decisions that looked good on paper but hurt real people. Maggie studied his face, looking for signs of deception. And Ben, where does he fit into all this? Ben wanted me to sell the company, all of it, including Patterson, Daniel explained. He thinks I'm becoming too sentimental, making decisions based on emotion rather than profit. That's what our argument was about tonight. Are you? Maggie asked. Becoming sentimental? A small smile touched Daniel's lips. Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally finding that balance I talked about, between building something lasting and remembering what really matters. Maggie was silent for a long moment, processing everything he'd told her. I need time to think about all this, Daniel. I understand, he said, standing to leave. For what it's worth, Maggie, what I feel for you is real. It has nothing to do with Patterson or Vertex or any of that. It's just about you and me. After he left, Rachel emerged from her room. Well? She asked. Do you believe him? I don't know, Maggie admitted. I want to. For what it's worth, Rachel said, sitting beside her mother. The way he looks at you, that can't be faked. Maggie leaned her head on her daughter's shoulder. When did you become the wise one in this relationship? I learned from the best, Rachel replied with a small smile. The next morning, Maggie woke to find a text from Robert. We need to talk. There are things about Westbrook you still don't know. At the same time, an email arrived from Daniel. I understand you need space, but please read the attached files before you make any decisions about us. They're the original acquisition documents for Patterson. I think they'll help explain what really happened. Caught between her past and her possible future, Maggie stared at her phone, uncertain which message to answer first. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel sat in his penthouse office with Ben, who had stayed the night. I don't understand why this woman has you so rattled, Ben said, watching his father stare out the window. You've dated since Mom died. What makes her different? Daniel turned to face his son, his expression serious. Because with Maggie, for the first time in 5 years, I can imagine a future. A real one, not just going through the motions. Ben's expression softened slightly. And if she can't forgive you for Patterson? Then I'll have to live with that, Daniel said quietly. But I'm not giving up without a fight. What none of them? I knew was that Robert had plans of his own, plans that could change everything for Maggie and Daniel. As he sat in his hotel room, Tiffany, packing her things to leave, he made a phone call to an old business associate. It's Lane, he said when the call connected. I need everything you can find on Westbrook Technologies and Daniel Westbrook personally. I want to know every skeleton in his closet. What's this about, Robert? The voice on the other end asked. Robert watched Tiffany slam her suitcase shut and walk out the door without a goodbye. Let's just say I'm trying to reclaim something I lost, and I need leverage. A week had passed since the disastrous dinner with Daniel and his son. Maggie had spent every day torn between reading the documents Daniel had sent her and listening to Robert's increasingly urgent messages asking to meet. Rachel had watched her mother's internal struggle with growing concern. Mom, you've been staring at your phone for 20 minutes, Rachel said one morning over coffee. Just call one of them and get it over with. Maggie sighed, putting her phone down. I'm not sure I'm ready to hear what either of them has to say. Daniel's documents seemed pretty convincing, Rachel pointed out. She had helped her mother go through the acquisition papers, which showed that Daniel's company had indeed preserved most of Patterson Publishing, when other buyers would have dismantled it completely. Yes, but there's still the fact that he knew who I was all along and didn't tell me, Maggie countered. Rachel shook her head. Would you have given him a chance if he'd told you right away? Hi, I'm Daniel Westbrook. My company bought yours and forced you into early retirement. Want to get coffee? Despite herself, Maggie smiled. When you put it that way. And as for Dad, Rachel continued, I love him, but he hurt you once already. Now his marriage is failing, and suddenly he wants you back. That seems convenient. You're right, Maggie admitted. But there's something Robert said that's been bothering me, that there are things about Daniel I still don't know. Then ask Daniel, Rachel said simply. Give him a chance to explain everything. If you don't like what you hear, you can walk away knowing you gave it a fair shot. Maggie looked at her daughter with pride. When did you get so level-headed about relationships? I'm better at giving advice than taking it, Rachel said with a rueful smile. Speaking of which, I have good news. I've been offered a job. Rachel, that's wonderful, Maggie exclaimed. Where? Doing what? It's a publishing position, actually, Rachel said. Digital content director for an educational startup. It's exciting. Work, great salary, benefits, I'm so proud of you, Maggie said, reaching across to squeeze her daughter's hand. When do you start? Rachel's smile faltered slightly. That's the thing, it's in London. I'd have to move next month. London? Maggie repeated, feeling a pang of loss even as she felt proud. That's far. I know, Rachel said. Part of me feels like I should stay here, especially with everything going on with you and Daniel and Dad. But another part feels like this is exactly what I need. A fresh start, away from all the reminders of Mark and the divorce. You should take it, Maggie said firmly, pushing aside her own feelings. This is an amazing opportunity for you. You're sure? Rachel asked. I don't want to leave you alone with all this drama. I'm a big girl, Maggie assured her. I can handle my own love life or lack thereof. Rachel looked relieved. Good, because I already accepted. I start in 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Maggie echoed. That's so soon. I know, Rachel said apologetically. I was afraid to tell you until I was sure it was the right decision. Well, then we have a lot to do, Maggie said, trying to sound cheerful despite the hollow feeling in her chest. Packing, finding you a place to live in London. Mom, Rachel interrupted gently. What about Daniel? Are you going to call him? Maggie sighed. Yes, I think it's time I heard the whole story. After Rachel left to meet friends for lunch, Maggie finally worked up the courage to call Daniel. He answered on the first ring. Maggie, he said, his voice warm with relief. I wasn't sure I'd hear from you again. I've been reading the documents. You sent, Maggie replied. They're not what I expected. Will you meet me? Daniel asked. There's so much I want to explain in person. Maggie agreed to meet him at a small park near her apartment that afternoon. When she arrived, Daniel was already waiting on a bench, nervously turning his hat in his hands. He stood when he saw her, his eyes lighting up with hope. Thank you for coming, he said as she sat beside him. I want to understand, Daniel, Maggie said simply. Robert keeps insisting there are things about you I don't know. I need the whole truth this time. Daniel nodded, taking a deep breath. 5 years ago, when I bought Patterson Publishing, I was a different person. Julie had been gone for about 6 months, and I was throwing myself into work to avoid dealing with the grief. I saw Patterson as just another business deal, a good one that would make money while preserving something valuable. And now? Maggie asked. Now I see how my decisions affected real people. People like you. Daniel looked at her intently. When I saw you on Fifth Avenue, I recognized your name immediately. I'd reviewed all the retirement packages personally. Yours stood out because you'd been one of the company's most valuable editors. You remembered me from a list of names? Maggie asked skeptically. I remembered your work, Daniel clarified. The educational series you edited won multiple awards. I kept those divisions intact specifically because of the quality. Maggie felt a small glow of pride, despite herself. So you knew who I was, but you didn't plan our meeting. How could I have? Daniel asked with a small smile. Even I'm not that powerful. I couldn't have known your heel would break at that exact moment, on that exact patch of sidewalk. And afterward, you kept seeing me, knowing what your company had done to mine. Daniel nodded. I told myself I'd explain everything once I got to know you better. But the more time we spent together, the more I cared about you, and the harder it became to tell you the truth. I was afraid of losing you. There's something else, isn't there? Maggie pressed. Something Robert knows? Daniel's expression darkened. Robert Lane's law firm represented Chen Global in the original takeover attempt of Patterson. They were going to strip the company bare, fire everyone, and sell off the valuable pieces. I stopped that from happening. What does that have to do with Robert? Maggie asked, confused. Robert was the lead attorney on the deal, Daniel explained. When I outbid Chen Global through Vertex, he lost a substantial commission. There's no love lost between us. Maggie sat back, stunned. Robert never told me he was involved with Patterson. He knew how devastated I was about losing my job. I'm not surprised, Daniel said grimly. From what I've learned about your ex-husband, he's always been good at keeping secrets. What's that supposed to mean? Maggie asked, feeling defensive despite herself. Daniel hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. There's something else you should know, and I'm only telling you because I believe in complete honesty now. Robert's affair with his assistant didn't start 5 years ago. It had been going on for nearly 2 years before that. Maggie felt as though she'd been slapped. How would you know that? Because my company vetted all the key personnel at firms we were dealing with, including the lawyers at Henderson and Blackwell. It was standard due diligence. We had reports about Robert's extracurricular activities. Maggie stood up, needing to move. So my husband was cheating on me for years, was involved in the deal that cost me my job and never told me any of it? I'm sorry, Maggie, Daniel said quietly. I didn't want to cause you more pain. It's not your fault, Maggie said, her mind racing. It's just a lot to process. Take all the time you need, Daniel told her. I'll be here when you're ready. There's something else you should know, Maggie said. Rachel has been offered a job in London. She's moving in 3 weeks. Daniel's eyes filled with sympathy. That's soon. How are you feeling about it? The simple question, asked with such genuine concern, brought tears to Maggie's eyes. Proud of her, sad for me, scared of being alone again. Daniel stood and tentatively put his arms around her. When she didn't pull away, he held her closer. You don't have to be alone, Maggie. Not if you don't want to be. She rested her head against his chest, finding comfort in his solid presence. I need to talk to Robert first. I need to hear his side of all this. I understand, Daniel said, though she could feel him tense slightly. Just be careful. Robert Lane is used to getting what he wants. And you're not, Maggie asked, looking up at him with a small smile. Daniel's eyes crinkled. I'm learning to want different things, better things. The next day, Maggie met Robert at a small cafe near his hotel. He was already seated when she arrived, looking distinguished in a dark suit, his silver-streaked hair perfectly combed. Maggie, he said, standing to greet her. You look lovely. Thank you, she replied coolly, taking the seat across from him. You wanted to talk. I'm listening. Robert leaned forward. I'm concerned about your involvement with Daniel Westbrook. He's not the man you think he is. And what kind of man is that? Maggie asked, keeping her voice level. A ruthless businessman who's hurt a lot of people, Robert said, including you. I know all about Patterson Publishing, Maggie told him. Daniel explained everything. What he didn't explain is why you never told me you were involved in that deal. Robert had the grace to look uncomfortable. It was a confidential client matter. I couldn't discuss it even with you. And what about Tiffany? Maggie pressed. Was that a confidential matter too? The fact that you were sleeping with her for 2 years before you left me? Robert's face paled. Who told you that? Does it matter? Maggie asked. Is it true? After a long pause, Robert nodded. Yes, but Maggie, that's all in the past now. Tiffany and I are over. I realize what a mistake I made. We could start fresh, you and I. Maggie shook her head in disbelief. You're incredible, you know that? After everything you've done, you expect me to just welcome you back into my life? And we have 30 years of history, Robert argued. We built a life together, raised our daughter together. That counts for something. Yes, it does, Maggie agreed. It counts as 30 years I can never get back. 30 years when I thought we were partners, but you were lying to me, keeping secrets and eventually cheating on me. People make mistakes, Robert said, reaching for her hand. She pulled it away. I've changed, Maggie. Losing you made me realize what really matters. Losing your second wife, you mean? Maggie corrected him. Funny how you only remembered how much I meant to you after Tiffany left. Robert's expression hardened. Westbrook isn't right for you. If you'd just listen— No, you listen, Maggie interrupted, finding a strength in her voice she hadn't known was there. I spent too many years listening to you, believing you, putting your needs first. I'm done with that. I'm building a new life now, and you're not a part of it. You're making a mistake, Robert warned. Maybe, Maggie conceded, standing up. But at least it's my mistake to make. She left the cafe feeling lighter than she had in years. For the first time since her divorce, she felt truly free of Robert's influence. She pulled out her phone and called Daniel. Can you meet me? She asked when he answered. There's something I want to tell you. They met at the bench where Daniel had first set her down after carrying her across the street. When he saw her approaching, he stood, a question in his eyes. I talked to Robert, Maggie said without preamble. He confirmed everything you told me. I'm sorry, Daniel said gently. I know it must have been painful to hear. Actually, it was liberating, Maggie admitted. For years, I've wondered if I could have saved my marriage, if I should have fought harder to keep Robert. Now I know the truth. He had checked out of our marriage long before he actually left. Daniel nodded, listening intently. It made me realize something else too, Maggie continued. I've been holding on to the past for too long. The hurt, the rejection, the loss of my career. It's kept me from moving forward, from taking risks. And now? Daniel asked, his voice hopeful. Now I want to take a risk, Maggie said, meeting his eyes. With you, if you're still willing. Daniel's face broke into a wide smile. More than willing, he said, taking her hands in his. Maggie Lane, I've fallen in love with you. I know it's fast and maybe a little crazy, but I love you too, Maggie interrupted, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. It is fast and maybe a little crazy, but at our age, why waste time? Daniel laughed, pulling her close. Why indeed? He murmured, before lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at once. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Rachel was busy preparing for her move to London, while Maggie and Daniel spent every possible moment together, making up for lost time. Ben had grudgingly agreed to meet Maggie again, and while he wasn't exactly warm, he was making an effort for his father's sake. He'll come around, Daniel assured her after a particularly strained dinner. He just needs time. I understand, Maggie said. He's still grieving Julie in his own way. You're remarkable, you know that? Daniel said, looking at her with admiration. Most women would have run for the hills after everything that's happened. I'm not most women, Maggie replied with a smile, and you're worth staying for. The night before Rachel's departure, Maggie hosted a small going-away party at her apartment. Daniel was there, as well as several of Rachel's friends. Even Robert made a brief appearance, having accepted with obvious reluctance that Maggie had moved on. He seems like a good man, Robert admitted grudgingly as he prepared to leave, nodding toward Daniel, who was across the room talking with Rachel. I hope he makes you happy. He does, Maggie said simply. Thank you for coming tonight. It meant a lot to Rachel. After everyone else had left, Maggie, Rachel, and Daniel sat in the living room with the remains of the cake and half-empty wine glasses. I'm going to miss you so much, Maggie told her, daughter fighting back tears. I'll miss you too, Mom, Rachel said, her own eyes wet. But London isn't that far. You can visit any time. Maybe bring Daniel with you, she added with a smile. I'd like that, Daniel said, squeezing Maggie's hand. And you'll be okay here, Rachel asked her mother. You promise? I promise, Maggie assured her. I'm more than okay. The next morning at the airport was emotional. Maggie held her daughter tightly, memorizing the feel of her in her arms. Call me as soon as you land, she instructed, wiping away tears. Will, Rachel promised. Don't worry about me, Mom. This is a good thing, remember? I know, Maggie said, forcing a smile. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. Rachel hugged Daniel next. Take care of her, she whispered in his ear. I will, he promised. You have my word. As Rachel headed toward the security checkpoint, Maggie felt Daniel's strong arm around her shoulders. She leaned into his solid presence, grateful for his support. She'll be fine, he assured her. She's strong like her mother. Maggie nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. As they watched Rachel disappear into the crowd, the airport loudspeaker crackled to life. Final boarding call for Flight 372 to London Heathrow. All passengers should proceed immediately to Gate 14. That's her flight, Maggie said softly. She's really leaving. Daniel turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I know this is a hard moment for you, but I want you to know you're not alone, not anymore. Maggie looked up at him, seeing all the love and promise in his eyes. I know, she said. To her surprise, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I've been carrying this around for days, waiting for the right moment. This might not be it, but I don't want to wait any longer. He opened the box to reveal not a ring, as she had half expected, but a small polished shoe heel, the one that had broken the day they met, now mounted on a silver chain. I kept it, Daniel explained, a touch of embarrassment coloring his cheeks. Silly. I know, but it seemed important. "It's not silly at all," Maggie said, deeply touched by the gesture. Daniel took a deep breath. "Maggie Lane, that broken heel brought you into my life when I least expected it, but most needed it. I carried you once, but now I think we walk forward, together. I love you and I want to spend whatever time we have left building a life with you." He took another small box from his pocket, this one containing a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" Maggie gasped, tears filling her eyes again, but these were happy tears. Around them, other travelers had stopped to watch, smiling at the romantic scene. "Yes," Maggie said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." As Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a tender kiss, the airport loudspeaker announced another final boarding call. But Maggie barely heard it. At 58, she had found a new beginning, a second chance at love. As she and Daniel walked hand in hand out of the airport and into the bright spring sunshine, Maggie felt a certainty she hadn't experienced in years. Life didn't end at 50 or after divorce, or when your children grew up and moved away. Sometimes, life was just beginning. Sometimes all it took was a broken heel, a chance encounter, and the courage to take a step toward love. 2 months later, on a perfect summer day, Maggie and Daniel stood together in the garden of his country house outside the city. The setting was intimate. Just a few close friends, Ben looking handsome but still reserved in a dark suit, and Rachel, home from London for the occasion, serving as Maggie's maid of honor. "You look beautiful, Mom," Rachel whispered as they waited for the music to start. Maggie smoothed the silk of her pale blue dress, not white, not at her age, but perfect for a second wedding. "Are you sure you're okay with all this? It's happened so fast." "I've never seen you happier," Rachel said honestly. "That's all that matters." As the music began and Maggie walked toward Daniel, whose face lit up at the sight of her, she knew her daughter was right. She had never been happier. There would be challenges ahead. Ben's continued ambivalence, the distance from Rachel, the inevitable complications of blending two lives that had been separate for so long. But facing those challenges with Daniel by her side seemed not just possible but exciting. When they spoke their vows, simple and heartfelt, Maggie felt none of the nervous uncertainty she'd experienced at her first wedding. This time, she knew exactly what she was promising, and to whom. This time, she walked into marriage with her eyes wide open, her heart healed and ready to love again. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant said, beaming at them. "You may kiss the bride." As Daniel leaned in to kiss her, Maggie heard Rachel's delighted applause and even saw Ben crack a reluctant smile. This was her family now, unexpected, imperfect but hers. The path ahead might not always be smooth, but Maggie knew one thing for certain. She was ready to walk it, one step at a time, with the man who had caught her when she fell and taught her heart to trust again. And that was more than enough.